Hello, I'm Agnieszka Petlik, and I'm here to discuss the research results of my study, Teacher Perceptions of the Social and Emotional Impacts of Remote Learning on Students with Exceptionalities. The intention of this study was to gather teacher perceptions and experiences to understand the potential outcomes of remote learning on students with exceptionalities and their social emotional learning. Trammell 2020 did a study prior to this and discussed how the COVID-19 pandemic really showed that students suffered loss in learning. The difference between his study and mine, and many others discussed, is that mine is focused in an elementary school setting, and it discusses and focuses on students with exceptionalities of all exceptionalities, not just certain ones. My research was also guided by these 3 research questions. Other research that support this study have themes of mental health crisis, need for social and emotional learning, teacher integration, and teacher preparation. As we all know, mental health crisis has been escalating over the years. Even Teasley 2018 discusses the need for educators and health professionals because of the trends that are sparking, such as mass shootings in our school systems. My research study setting is in 2 different elementary schools. Predominantly, Scranton Elementary is predominantly white with higher per pupil expenditure, and it's a suburban district with a distance learning academy. The other school in the next district is a predominantly minority student-based population, and it has much lower per pupil expenditure. It's an urban district with the hybrid model. The sample of teachers was 16, 8 elementary school teachers, 3 elementary special education teachers, and 5 related service providers. The selection criteria: the teachers had to be tenure teachers, they had to be employed by one of the districts, and have 1 or more special education students who participate in distance learning or the hybrid model. It was guided by 20 open-ended questions in a semi-structured interview protocol where participants got to pick from video platform or in-person interviews, and the study was guided by grounded theory. The results of this qualitative study: here are the full open code list and all the codes. You can see there are over 57 codes. After an analysis and a look at the codes, I synthesized and noticed that I compare it down to 36 codes. Please note there's a frequency of how many times each code came up and the percent of participants that discussed this code. You can really see that all 16 participants, which is the 100%, discussed that they had professional learning in order to prepare for remote learning, and that they had little to no experience. They also talked about student disengagement during remote learning. And the other 100% discusses the children in the classroom now. The students with exceptionalities have no perseverance. They can't collaborate or play. They have little understanding of school expectations. They can't see others' perspectives. There's no self-regulation or coping skills. They're very impulsive, have conflicts, are unable to problem solve. Some are very empathetic and support one another. However, all these skills are teacher-led based 100% of the time. Here's the qualitative data map analysis. You can tell the data actually goes up in columns. We started off at the 36 on the bottom. After I did my preliminary analysis, that's what came up with. After a second analysis through axial coding, I came up with 8 different themes, categories. And after those 8 categories, I came up with 3 themes: students, SEL, deficit, and exceptions, challenges among stakeholders, and superficial technology knowledge and skills. Please note all 3 themes emerged 100% of the time and were discussed by all participants. The qualitative results by theme: if we look at students' social emotional deficits and exceptions, there is a huge list of negative codes that came up from distance learning, from remote learning, such as lack of student engagement, no perseverance, little understanding, behind developmentally, children are anxious and withdrawn, and the list continues. There are 2 positive codes that came up, that students are tech savvy now and do advocate for themselves. And the theme of challenges among stakeholders, again, we have lots of negative codes. In this section, however, you can see the inequities within the 2 schools. Challenges to build relationship and feelings of isolation, unreasonable expectations, which had to do with the dual teaching, teacher frustrations and anxiety, technical difficulties, which had to do more with, again, the urban district, talking about no Wi-Fi, no computers, having challenges at home with parental support because many had to work or there were language barriers. There was 1 positive code, which was access to social time and academics. And this, again, was an inequity where you can tell that the suburban district really had more participants discussing how they were able to make one-on-one sessions with their students. They were able to have those really close-knit relationships because they were only on that call with those students. Qualitative results by superficial technology knowledge and skills. Again, this is not necessarily negative or positive like the other 2. However, you can see there were multiple opportunities of expression that teachers discussed, many platforms that they were taught. Lots of teachers had structured online schedules and curriculum. They did their best to accommodate to student needs, and there was lots of professional learning, even though they had little to no experience. The difference here is the level of teaching. As you can see, and in my research, I discussed this in the SAMR model. There is a tiered support of using technology to integrate into the curriculum. And even though the teachers really tried their best, it was very on the basic level of the SAMR, which was just substituting in-person learning with remote learning. So what does this mean? Applications and recommendations for practice. Again, we noticed that social emotional learning is a huge deficit now, and it's also implied for general education students, and definitely shown with students with exceptionalities. We need to make sure we focus on having that social emotional block in our daily curriculum and making sure that we use concrete examples of SEL skills and embed them into the daily curriculum. In one of the results, it talked about teachers having to stop their lessons and continually model all those SEL skills when we need to be more proactive instead of being reactive. Implication 2, unreasonable expectations, which was in results to the dual teaching model. We really have to do away with that. Teachers cannot be expected to dual teaching. It is not very good practice, and it did not help students learn. Implication 3, teachers collaborated with one another and with colleagues, and this is really important to keep in mind. Collaboration among staff is huge, and it needs to be provided. That time is sacred, and we need to have those PLC times to discuss what's going on in the classrooms, the best practices, what's working, what's not working, so we can have that feedback. Teachers also use multiple means of expression and multiple platforms to support their students. Having professional learning on best practices and universal design for learning to help meet the needs of our students is critical. Teachers express the need of continually facilitate teacher-led explicit support, again, discussing how we need to make sure that we are intertwining those SEL skills in between all our subjects throughout the day, and how critical technology knowledge is. Recommendation is to continue our technology support and continued learning. Teacher practices, this is for higher education, making sure that any new teachers that are coming into are having that scope and sequence of SEL in their learning, also giving them pre-service teaching opportunities to teach social emotional learning so they are better prepared when they come into the classroom as the needs are so high. Lastly, policymakers also need to get on board as we need their support. Just like we have Common Core standards to implement for reading, writing, and math, we also need to have more support and resources for SEL to support the whole child, as well as funding. Funding is critical. We need more social workers. We need more school psychologists and behavior support, as teachers cannot do it all. Limitations of this study included the sample size, which only included 16 teachers, the time of the study that was completed. I had to have the participants really reflect on what was going on in remote learning as it was no longer happening in the classroom. My personal and professional connections as the researcher, I was in both districts and participated in both models. So I really tried to keep all my biases and all my information out of this research. And overlap of different models. Both the districts actually intertwined with their models, as one started off as a hybrid model, then turned into distance learning, and the other actually had some related service providers fully online. And so it was very hard to tweak out which model was best. However, you definitely can see some of the inequities between the schools. Recommendations for future would definitely be a larger pool of teacher candidates, interviews for parents and students, a focus on all students, and doing a mixed method study. These are the references that supported my research, and I want to thank you for taking the time and listening, as I want to say lastly that social emotional learning is critical for our students' success. We need to make sure we address the whole child. We cannot expect to catch them up in reading, writing, and math if they are going through so much trauma from the previous situation with remote learning. So please, again, take this into